everyone, and welcome to the Into Infinity broadcast, I2I. And today I want to talk about space. Right, what is space? How is it created? And we changed also a little bit the format to a very short broadcast, so hopefully I'll be done in about 20 to 30 minutes. So, yeah, what is space? So you see me right now, I'm floating around space, and space is quite huge and quite big. But what kind of shape does space actually have? I mean, we're working in space, we're living in space, but what kind of space is it? And that's the topic today. So let's check it out, what I got for you. So, this is our classroom. And yeah, this is what I want to talk about. And I have some geometries for you. There's 3 geometries that I want to mention today or talk a little bit about today. Obviously, it's going to be just an introduction, but there is the sphere. Yeah, we all know the sphere. It's very round, yeah, in 3D. Then we have the cube, yeah, the one in the middle, the green one. And you can see this is like a very nice image in 2D, but actually it's a 3D object. And this is the octahedron. Some of you might not know it, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about this one in the end. And these 3, yeah, we probably just probably are most familiar with this one, but actually all of these 3 exist and they are dependent on each other. And they all somehow link to this very mysterious image in the background. Some of you probably have seen it. It's called the seed of life, and it's a very famous spiritual symbol or ancient symbol, you could say. But I can do whole workshops on that. All right, so what is actually space? Yeah, so we're living in space, and here's a guy who is inside of a certain space, and most of us probably think of a cube when they think about space. So something that has an x, a y, and a z axis. Yeah, 3 vectors going into 3 directions at 90 degrees, as you can see here. And isn't it actually also amazing when you walk and you stand on the ground, you're actually exactly orientated at 90 degrees. So there is something about that. We build houses at 90 degrees, and actually this is how we think in terms of 3D space. We think in terms of a cube. And also mathematically, we think in a cube. But the cube is not the only 3D form that exists. In fact, there have been 5 different forms, including the sphere. The sphere is, in a sense, the all-encompassing form because it has infinite sides. Yeah, so for example, this one, the cube, yeah, if you count the corners is 1, 2, 3, 4, and another 4 on the bottom, that makes 8. So if you would mark 8 points on a sphere that are exactly the same distance to each other, and you just connect them with lines, you have it. You have a cube. And you can do that with any of these 5 shapes. But the most interesting thing about that is there is no other 3D form where you can do that with. No other form where also each side has a certain equilibrium as well. Like let's say in the cube, every side is a square. So that's quite a mystery if you think about 3D space, because why is it limited to 5? And these 5 shapes, I don't know if you learned it in school. I did not learn it in school. I only learned about the cube, but there are actually 5, and they're called the 5 platonic solids. Here is an image of Plato in the background, and that's a very, very famous Greek philosopher. He was really into understanding reality through the geometrical view, but also having a little bit of a philosophical understanding of it as well. And the five solids, they were actually not, they didn't come from him. He just rediscovered them. They actually were found much before, and probably the oldest ones were found in Aberdeen, Scotland. A lot, yeah, way before Plato actually. So the question is now, so what is it about these shapes? Why are there only 5? And what kind of arrangement do they appear? Because obviously all of them must have some sort of place in this reality, not just the cube. And also, what does it mean then for us? And what kind of space are we living in? Because I don't know if you ever wondered, but I always wondered, what's all these things with dimensions and multidimensional realities, parallel universes? Well, if you want to go to these mindsets and think about these things, then the question is actually we have to understand our space first and have to understand how is actually the universe constructed, how is the architecture of the universe in terms of geometry. And once we can understand that, then maybe we can also understand, well, maybe there are other dimensions that have different types of geometries, and maybe we can move into those dimensions as well, if you like the spiritual thought. Yeah, just bringing that in too, for those who like to think in these ways. So if you're thinking about mathematics, and if you think about what you probably learned in school, just like me, then this is the traditional model. Yeah, we think about, well, it all started with a dot, which is in a sense the 0 dimension. And that's a very interesting thing as well, what it actually means. It means it's all compressed in a sense to a point that doesn't actually exist. It doesn't exist, kind of like a 0. And then what happens in mathematics through translation, this dot can move in one direction to make the first dimension, which in a sense is a line. And the line then can again translate into another direction at 90 degrees, which makes a square the first 2D shape in a sense when you think in terms of cube. It's a square. Everything is 90 degrees here. And then the whole square can take on another direction and moves onto a z-axis and therefore creates a cube. Now, this is basic mathematics, yeah? So 0, 1D, 2D, and 3D. And when we think about 3D space, we always think about cubes. It's just the way we think. But this is obviously not it. There are other spaces, and I'm going to talk about this in a second. Now, I do want to mention here that there is a 4th dimension, and most of us think about the 4th dimension, oh, that's time. Yeah, so we have 3-dimensional space, and then there's time. It's true, and I'll tell you why. But there is also a shape that represents 4D. And in a sense, in terms of a cube, it has to move again. So if it translates, it has to translate again. And in this way, you can just think about a cube within a cube. And these cubes swap places. So one can move up and the other one collapses back in. And this is called a 4D hypercube or tesseract, which in a sense is a moving thing. And when we think about movement, it's actually time. Yeah, because there is a changement in space, there's a change in time when things are moving, yeah, which is not the case in a sense in the cube. These are just still objects. So here we have the component of time, you could say, in the 4D hypercube. But I'm going to talk more about this shape in my upcoming workshop in August, the 6th. So if you're more interested to learn about this shape and how it affects your life, that's when you can join me on the online workshop. But let's move on. Because if you think about it, is this the way the universe is actually being created? Because if this is so, then it's quite an imbalanced view, actually, if you think about it, because the dot is moving in one direction. The original dot was here, and this line is moving again, and the whole square is moving, but the original dot stayed in one corner, which basically means that the universe came out of the corner of a cube to make a cube. But is this really how we perceive reality? Well, let's think about the Big Bang, because this is where we all come from when we think about space. Because before the Big Bang, there was no space, there was no time, there was no energy and no matter, right? So let's start with a dot. At least we can agree on this. We all started from a dot, which in a sense is a singularity. Everything was compressed. Here's a very nice quote. I'm just going to read that out. So NASA, basically, is like, the universe came into existence from infinite density and intense heat called a singularity, which expanded out to create space, time, and all matter. So there was no space and no time, and that makes completely sense because we don't have any space in a cube because it's 0D. But if you think about if something explodes, and just think about it yourself, I have a dot and I'm going to blow this dot up in all directions. Well, what kind of shape does it do? What kind of shape does it make? It doesn't make a cube, does it? It actually makes something that's circular. So here we see a circle because it just expands in all directions in equilibrium. It wouldn't just create a square. So, and this is also something that we observe. If you're thinking about the Earth and you're going outside or you observe any other planet, well, actually, these are all round. All of these things are round. So in terms of space that we can look from the vacuum, all of these other spaces, we see it as round, depending on our perspective. So how is it then? How is it then when we follow the idea of circular movement, let's say rotation? How is the dot then expanding? How is it changing shape? And this is very different to the cube, because when we have a dot, actually when we draw geometry, and I always say practice with the drawing compass, because you can find a lot about the universe just working with the drawing compass. Because when we have the drawing compass and we open it up, then what happens with the dot, it actually splits in two directions. So when it starts here in the middle, one goes this way and one goes that way, which is actually completely in equilibrium, going to the opposite sides. And that creates a line. In a sense, when we work with the drawing compass, that is the radius, right? Or the diameter. So it creates a line. Now then, this line can rotate around. When it rotates, it's actually making a circle, which is the shape that we perceive, let's say, on the planet. Yeah, we see this shape. And also what happens actually before we get to the, this is actually the wrong title, yeah, it should be sphere. So before we get to the sphere, what also can happen, it's actually happening simultaneously. Yeah? So from the dot, you can have that the dot expands out. Let's say I'm going to move my hands up, it rotates around and it makes another circle and it collapses back into a dot. Yeah, that kind of movement, it makes another 4D shape. Just like the hypercube for the cube, we have a similar shape in 4D for the circle, which is a dot and a circle collapsing, which creates the torus. And the torus itself is actually, we see that. It's a very, very common phenomenon in nature. It's like an electromagnetic field, because the Earth itself has a north and a south pole. But inside this electromagnetic field, we find that something is circular, the Earth, which is a sphere. So the question is the electromagnetic field making a sphere, or is the sphere making the electromagnetic field? Well, this is another discussion, but let's say in our view, we believe that the torus here is an electromagnetic field, and inside there is a sphere that rotates. And this is actually a very common shape throughout the universe. And this is also making more sense in terms of the Big Bang. Let's say something expands out, yeah, and it creates ultimately a circle. Well, because the whole universe is expanding out in all directions, it's a spherical expansion, but maybe at the same time there could be a contraction as well. And I talked about this in my other broadcast last time about the beginning of the universe, so check it out, it's still there on YouTube, where actually this field can collapse again. So everything in a sense needs to happen in equilibrium, and I think this idea of rotation makes a lot of sense, because in the universe actually everything is rotating. You could say the planets are rotating around themselves, the planet itself is rotating around the sun, the whole solar system is rotating around the galaxy, and probably the whole galaxy is rotating around, who knows, the center of the universe. So the rotational law makes sense looking at the larger scales. But how can we now compare these two ideas? Because let's say this is the stuff that we learn in school. Yeah, so this is 0D, a dot. 1D, it's a line. 2D is a square. 3D is a cube. And 4D is two cubes swapping, i.e. time. Or is it a dot that expands in two directions in equilibrium? This line can rotate to make a circle. In a sense, the circle can rotate as well to make a sphere, and the dot can swap between a circle and the circle comes back to the dot to make another 4D shape, which is, again, time in a sense. And these properties are quite different, because if we look at it from the outside, this is definitely the case. So let me just show you it from here. So hopefully I'm not putting my face over the images. So there you go. So we have the two models that I'm just compare. This is our cubic model, the translational model, how everything can translate. The problem with this is that the original dot would be in the corner of the cube. So let's say the universe comes out of like that and it would spew out of the cube, or actually the dot would be in the center and the universe expands in a circular way. But it doesn't mean that both of them don't exist or just one exists. I mean, we do have a sensation of the cubic dimension of space in our reality because this is how we build houses. Now, the question is only, how is it actually related to each other? And probably all of these shapes exist, but they exist in a certain order, just like a house. They build a certain architecture and are intimately connected. But I want to talk about another shape, which is actually it's two other shapes, yeah, which is the seed of life and the octahedron as a third part, because we talked about the sphere or we talked about the cube, but there are other shapes because we said there are 5 platonic solids and all of these 5 platonic solids fit inside the sphere, but we're just going to talk about 3 today, and this is the last one, which is the octahedron, which is this shape you see down here. It's like a pyramid and another pyramid on the bottom, like a crystal in a sense. And this shape, we saw it in the beginning, it's like the template for all of these solids. You can actually find all of them in this shape. But not only that, I'm going to show you now as well that this is also the template, like a plan for this shape to come into existence. And this is called the seed of life. It has 7 equally overlapping circles. That's very important, the number 7. If you recognize that, the 7 days of creation. And it's known as the perfect seal, or sometimes also the blueprint of creation. And I had another broadcast about this a few weeks ago. So if you want to see that, check it out on YouTube. But now I'm going to show you how this shape, which basically just can be created by overlapping circles. So it follows the circular rotational model, but it doesn't stop with 1 circle. It continues making 7 and it makes the seal. Now, once it has these 7 circles overlapping, then you can draw 3 lines, like 3 axes that are at 60 degrees to each other when they lay flat on the plane. And now I'm going to tell you that actually these are the same axes that could rotate into this shape as the internal geometry, so like a skeleton of the octahedron. You can see here there's a square plane, and these are the pyramids on top and the pyramids on the bottom, which are on an X, X, Y, and Z axis, at 90 degrees, just like a cube. But how is this actually working? We're going to find out now. Right, so if you think about the seed of life, and we're just going to blend out the circles here, and we're just going to concentrate on the 3 lines, and this is on the flat plane. You can see it's actually inside of a circle. We can rotate 1 axis up and down, like a north and a south pole. And the other 2, which are 60 degrees, we can just expand them a little bit in equilibrium, so they create a 90-degree angle, which form the cross inside of a square. And with this, you have exactly 90 degrees, not only to the one in the plane, but also to the one going up and down, which is the exact geometry that we find in the octahedron. And I want to mention here, because it's a beautiful perspective that Baptiste made, he showed you also in this very beautiful image that the Star of David is actually hidden in this image, as you can see here, which is 2 triangles, one going up and one going down. Very famous Hebrew symbol. You find it on the Israeli flag. So here's a little bit of spiritual thought. But what's amazing here is that actually through rotation, you can generate the octahedron from the seed of life. Just by rotating and by bringing everything in equilibrium, we have this beautiful shape here. And what's even more amazing is this is not just a random shape. Most of us probably won't see it anywhere in reality, but if we're looking into the smallest part of what reality is, which is matter, which is the atoms, you'll be surprised to know that actually it appears there. just a little bit of a recap on the atom, yeah? So the dot and the circle is actually a very great representation. So we have a dot, which is basically just the center of the atom, and then the circle makes the so-called shells, the electron shells or the electron cloud. But these electrons, they are not just like spheres. Actually, only the first two are like spheres. So here you have it. The spheres exist in the atom. But after that, these electrons form geometries. And this is the next geometries they form. They form the so-called p orbitals on an x, y, and z axis, exactly at 90 degrees to each other. And if you just see them as lines, you will see, and this is actually an image from a school book, yeah, you can see it is an octahedron. So the octahedron comes actually before the cube into existence. And that is quite amazing because most people don't know that. They don't know that the first platonic solid that comes into existence is the octahedron. And we'll just say, I think if you're looking at the atom, it makes sense that it's the first one because this is how the electrons fall into place. And if we're looking into this more, and we'll talk about this more in our future broadcast as well, which is our new concept of atomic geometry, we'll see that how this octahedron is then nested and to what kind of other geometries it is linked to, how they're interrelated, to build this very beautiful architecture of geometry that builds the foundation of our reality and the so-called dimensions. So, to recap, what have we learned? We learned about space, yeah? 3 types of space, 3 types of shapes that come into existence. And I'm not saying that this is it, because we said that there are actually 5 more. But most of us are actually just familiar with the cube, because this is, let's say, how we see reality here. And that makes sense, because we're walking on 90 degrees. We build houses in cubes. We're quite cubic in our mindset, actually. Yeah, in science, it's a lot about cubes. But it's not the only shape. Actually, a cube fits into a sphere, and this shape also fits into a sphere. Actually, the sphere is the all-encompassing form of all other 3D shapes in terms of regularity. So we said we had 5 platonic solids, and all of them fit inside of a sphere. There are no other 3D shapes that have the same characteristics like these solids. And that's amazing why it's only 5. But the sphere, in a sense, is the all-encompassing form, and we can see it actually everywhere in reality. You could say you see the Earth is like that. Even in the atom, we have the spherical orbitals, which is the s orbitals. They look like spheres. The sun looks like that. Even the whole solar system rotates around the center in a circular way. I mean, circles is actually everywhere, because in the universe is rotating all the time and anywhere. So circular space makes a lot of sense as in terms of an all-encompassing form. And it makes sense in terms of the Big Bang, something expands from a center. Now, when it comes to a cube, it makes sense to work with a cube because we're here and this is how we perceive reality. But there is a missing link in how this cube actually comes into existence. I'm not going to tell you today, but I'm going to give you a hint. I'm going to tell you a little bit more next time, not next time, but after that, how the cube is actually then coming really into existence, which is a little bit later. It's actually not the first shape. But I showed you today that it's actually the octahedron. The octahedron is the first shape that can come out of existence from the seed of life. Obviously, it works in collaboration with the sphere. Yeah, we saw that the octahedron is within the sphere. All of these shapes are always within the sphere. But it's the first shape that comes into existence from the atom, from the first orbitals, which is, by the way, neon gas. And the cube is something that I can tell you already will show up later. But what does it mean now for us? Well, what it means is that these geometries, they're such fundamental shapes, and you can blow them up and you can make them really small. It doesn't matter. They will always hold the same shape. So if the universe really is based on a holistic and interconnected web of geometries that expresses itself as above, so below, then by understanding the atom and how these shapes work with each other, we can also understand more about our own being and our own energy field and how actually we work with our consciousness. Because there's a lot of spiritual technologies that use these shapes to enhance our energy field, to enhance our way of thinking. So the application of this knowledge is quite vast, but we really have to get into it first to understand how everything is actually connected. So with that said, I want to leave you with a quote from Plato, the Greek philosopher, and he says, "The knowledge of which geometry aims is the knowledge of the eternal." So if you've started to watch this broadcast for the first time, then I can only tell you there's much more to explore. And once you really get into it, you'll see that the mysteries of the universe are really hidden within these simple shapes. And you can learn a lot about how everything is built, how your body works, how chemistry works, how physics works, and how it's linked to philosophical questions of dimensions and stuff like that. So I hope that I gave you a little bit of an introduction into the field of geometry. And next week, actually not next week, on the 6th of August, I have a workshop coming up. It's the first one that I'm doing in our virtual classroom, and this is just for a very small group of people, so 15 people, that I want to invite to learn more about these geometries, learn more about the torus, how it is expressed around you, and how you can use it to enhance your life, to bring in new ideas, and to think also geometrically, and how you can actually use it to go on the right path, let's say, yeah. So if you're interested in that, this is a 2-hour workshop. It's happening on the 6th of August. And just sign up. There's a link in the text for this workshop. And you can see me online and we can work together. And I want you to draw, because that's when you get hands-on a little bit more and not just listen. But next week, I'll be back with another broadcast about the flower of life, which is, in a sense, an expanded version of the seed of life. You can see the seed of life in the background. The flower of life is the next expansion, and it's a very, very famous symbol. You probably have seen it in tattoos or somewhere in designs, but I'm going to talk about the other shapes that are hidden within this big shape, where it comes from, and what's the secret meaning behind it. Yeah, with that said, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm just going to come back here. Yeah, I want to just thank you for watching. This was a very quick one, and I hope you enjoyed and you got a little bit of knowledge. You can always leave a comment on YouTube or Facebook. Obviously, like our Facebook page. There's a lot of things happening in the background. We're just preparing much of our new ideas, also in articles. So stay tuned, and I'll be back next Sunday for the Flower of Life workshop. Until then, see you soon. Namaste, and have a good day. Yeah, that's a good.